This is the best plane in the entire game for Fox 3 combat if you don't want to go grinding through an entire tech tree. This is the JF-17. It sits in the Chinese tech tree, it's a Pakistan plane, and it is absolutely free. And that intro comes with two important clarifications. One, it is free, as in it isn't a premium, it's not going to cost you any money, and it's not even going to cost you any time for grinding for it directly, but it is a squadron vehicle. You have to be in a squadron for a certain amount of time, and an active squadron at that. Typically you want to be in a squadron that gets about 20,000 squadron RP every 3 days, something along those lines, and that contributes to your squadron vehicle research. It doesn't matter what plane you're playing at the time, what rank you have at the time, all of that is irrelevant. Just be in an active squadron and start researching the JF-17 with your squadron research. And I did say that this is the best plane in the entire game for Fox 3 combat that you don't actually have to grind for. And of course, your other options are pretty few, but they are out there. You can buy the premium Viggen with AMRAAMs, you can buy the event Kafir C-10 with the Derby missiles, or you can buy the event F-14 that has the Fakor 90. And while the Fakor 90s are certainly competitive missiles, overall as a whole, this plane is probably the most competitive for the battle rating it sits at. For early game, for late game, for mid game, whatever the challenge may be, the JF-17 is pretty competitive at its battle rating, but its battle rating is a little complicated, and we will be getting to that very shortly. You get 4 PL-12 missiles, which are kind of just like AMRAAM Juniors. Think of them the same way. They're essentially the same combat style of missile. They don't pull super hard necessarily, especially not at close range, but they have a good amount of range, more than something like the Derby or the R-77 or even the Mika missile. So overall, it's just kind of it's a good missile. You're not going to have any problems with it. It's just not a specialty missile by any means, if that makes sense. In addition to that, you get 2 PL-5E2s, which are all aspect PL-5s with a bit more G-Pool and an IRCCM Seeker. It is a gate with IRCCM Seeker, so it's the exact same flare resistance on something like the Magic 2 or the R-73. Of course, the R-73 having the wider field of view Seeker before launch is a little bit worse, but as far as the gate width and IRCCM capabilities, all three of those missiles are identical. They are good missiles anytime you have a gate with IRCCM missile that can close the gap between it and its target extremely quickly, like say the Magic 2 or the PL-5. That is what you want when it comes to gate with IRCCM. The closer the missile is to the target, the harder it is to flare. The RWR is good, and the radar leaves me with no complaints. I do wish it had radar HMD, which it does not have, but at 13.3, that's not necessarily commonplace just yet, so it's not a huge deal. However, there are 3 major shortcomings of this plane that make it a little annoying to play, and why I actually don't like this plane personally. That said, it is a great plane, especially for 13.3 battle rating, and I can't stress that enough because that's going to be one of the shortcomings we talk about here. It's great for 13.3. And we may as well just cut to the chase. That is the biggest problem I have with this plane, is the fact that it is 13.3. And those of you who have played 13.0 as well as 13.3 aircraft know that those two battle ratings may as well just be 13.7 or 14.0. You very rarely get down tiers. More often than not, it's going to be a 13.7 match, and if not, it's probably going to be a 14.0 match maximum up tier. And in those matchmakers, again, the JF-17, it's probably the best 13.3 plane in the entire game, but these 13.0s and 13.3s just do not hold up too well in up tiers, and more often than not, they kind of just become food for the 13.7s and 14.0s. The JF-17 specifically only has about 64 countermeasures, so when you're in something like an F-15A at 13.0 and you get up tiered, yes, it's extremely hard to find kills because all you have is Sparrows and 9Ms against a bunch of Fox 3s, but at least you have 240 countermeasures and excellent flight performance, of course, that make getting killed a little bit more difficult. You can kind of play as needed, whatever you need to do to give your limited weapon kit the best chance possible to get a kill. Of course, as we know, it often doesn't work out, but when you only have 64 countermeasures and you're in a game full of Fox 3s, it's very tricky to manage your countermeasures, manage your playstyle in a way that you're not constantly notching and chaffing the incoming Fox 3 missiles, because you will run out, especially if you want to take any kind of flares whatsoever. I only take about 24 flares oftentimes even less these days. I'll maybe even run in the teens of flares. Either way, it's not enough chaff to be going guns blazing, Fox 3 spamming at altitude. So my main gripes with this plane is the matchmaker and the countermeasure count. I really do not think go together well. You need more countermeasures than this if you're going to be playing in these 13.7 and 14.0 lobbies. Is it doable? Absolutely. It's just frustrating to have to work around. And the third gripe I have with this aircraft is its flight performance, and it's kind of a love-hate relationship. On one hand, the 1 versus 1 dogfight performance of the JF-17 is phenomenal. This is one of the best dogfighters in the game. I feel like I've been saying that a lot recently, but this plane is certainly something to be reckoned with. Just going off of memory, I think the only planes that are actually going to be beating this thing in a 1 versus 1 dueling type dogfighting scenario is the J-10, the F-16A, the Gripen, and of course the Eurofighter 2000. And I'm going to put a question mark on the Rafale because I'm not really sure. Willy Walrus, if you're watching, maybe you can let us know in the comments down below. Point is, when it comes to 1 versus 1 matchups, this is a great plane to have, especially when you're playing against things like Su-27s. In this situation, there's nothing this guy is going to be doing to the JF-17 in an isolated dogfight, except maybe get a flat spinning R-73 with HMD off at me as he's spinning to the ground dead. Love that gameplay mechanic, by the way. But aside from the phenomenal 1 versus 1 dogfighting performance, it's just typical ARB flight model is not something that I really enjoy whatsoever. It bleeds speed very hard, it pulls a lot of angle when you're tapping the elevator, and its engine is pretty underpowered for the battle rating. You're going to have a pretty hard time getting this thing over Mach 1.1 in most combat scenarios. Hell, sometimes you're going to have a hard time staying supersonic at all if you have to move the elevator. And so that alone is going to make it so that you're going to have a pretty difficult time actually using your Fox 3s at altitude. So more often than not in up tiers, I'll typically stay pretty close to the ground. You'll see I'm just multipathing missiles here. I'm kind of dodging and weaving back and forth as to make multipathing a little bit more probable that it'll actually work for me. I am going to be making a multipath tutorial, as I said, pretty shortly, but this is pretty much how I handle most of my up tiers in the JF-17. Multipathing, and then when I absolutely need to, again, you can just 90 degree or a little bit past 90 degree and notch and shaft, you know what I mean. Su-27 right above me, diving straight toward me. I could just pitch up here and get a shot on him that he would die to, but that would mean he'd also get a shot on me that I would not be able to evade. At least it'd be very difficult for me to evade. Instead, I wait until he breaks off, and then I get my missile off way before he gets his off, and that gives me a lot more time to react to it, and I can actually properly notch and shaft that, or flare it, whatever it may be, and we get a kill. Again, the flight performance of this plane is really going to make it difficult to do BVR fights at altitude. It does not keep speed well whatsoever. If you have to get into a notch to drop your chaff and avoid that Fox 3, you're going to be going pretty slow, and especially so if you do it twice. People launching AMRAAMs at you are going to be going Mach 1.2, 1.3, maybe even 1.4 faster, and your JF-17 is going to be struggling to get past Mach 1.1. So already you're at a big disadvantage speed-wise there when it comes to BVR engagements. So my main recommendation is just avoid BVR altogether. Stay low to the ground, play a little bit passive, and find your targets of opportunity. Maybe later in the game where there's less numbers around, there's less chaos, less missiles flying through the air, you can absolutely get some altitude and find some isolated BVR fights, and that way you're not going to be running out of all of your chaff after having to evade 10 missiles. But just as a general rule, in the early parts of the match, even maybe in the middle of parts of the match, I'll stay a little bit lower to the ground. And again, with that underpowered engine relative to this battle rate, it makes getting your speed back after having lost a bunch of it pretty difficult to do. So I don't mean to paint the JF-17 in too bad of a light by any means. Like I said, this plane is great. It's the best 13.3 battle rating plane in the entire game. Two main issues, of course, is just the low countermeasure count and the terrible matchmaker that the 13.0s and 13.3s have to deal with on the regular. Other than that, great plane, and I don't think that this is a bad pick whatsoever for your squadron vehicle. In fact, I would probably say this would be the go-to squadron vehicle if it were me researching one. This is kind of my main play style, again, staying low to the ground, shooting my missiles when I'm pretty confident that they're going to be getting kills, whether it be an unaware target or just closing the distance as much as possible before actually firing. That way they have very little time to react, and so long as I don't think they're going to be actually firing at me, that's not a problem. Of course, you don't want to be closing the distance when they're looking right at you, because then you're going to be in the same boat as them. You're going to end up trading. Speaking of being safe with your missiles, I waste one firing one at his missile. I guess my main point is just because you have Fox 3s doesn't mean you need to go shooting them off willy-nilly at far range trying to get a new record for max range kills. By no means do you have to do that. They're great tools in close range, just don't let them get too close obviously, and make sure you're picking off targets that aren't looking at you as always, and make sure you're able to defend yourself and you're not just trading your life one-to-one. As you can see, that Typhoon already had a missile off on me. By the time I fumbled with my keys, tried to get a lock on him and shoot a missile at him, back at him, that AMRAAM would have been pretty close to me. I probably would have died, so I just didn't even bother. Instead, I went straight for the multipath, evaded that missile, and we'll live to fight another day. We'll get our PL-12 off a little bit later here. It is very tempting just to lock and shoot the first thing you see, but if it means dying, it's not worth it. I don't like trading my life. I like to live as long as possible and try to win the game. Whether or not I actually do, that's another story. And again, we take on an F-14 head on. The F-14 was never going to win that. I had the terrain there. I have better weapons, but he thought he had me by surprise. I can understand what he was going for there. It's just I kind of noticed him behind me, turned around, and we dealt with that threat. At this point in the game, it's just too late to do anything. There's not enough teammates alive. I'm the last guy alive on this side of the map with maybe one other teammate somewhere across the map. Too many missiles flying in, and I'm just going to end up dying. Let me know what you guys think of the JF-17 in the comments down below, and I'll see you later.